In the north, these extremist groups were tolerated, and the Israelis were constantly bombing the country. When this attack began a couple of weeks ago, a Syrian general was earning $40 a month.
So there was no army, you think?
And the Al-Qaeda troops, some of them were earning up to $2,000 a month.
So there was no army to support for Iran to support. I guess the question though is that one of the reasons why the Syrian people didn't rise up in 2013, 14, 15, 16 was also the fact they were under the thumb of a dictator who tortured and disappeared them. I mean, we can't downplay that you say Iran supported Assad not because they thought he was a good person, but for strategic reasons. We must reflect on the reasons why the Syrians weren't able to overthrow him was because he tortured hundreds of thousands of them. He disappeared hundreds of thousands of them, and he actually displaced millions of them.
I think you are distorting reality. I think you're trying to hide the role that your government's played in the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Syrians.
Well, I'm not imagining Sednaya prison. I'm not imagining the woman I spoke to on this program. No, I'm just saying I'm not imagining the fact that people have been disappeared by Assad. That's not my imagination. That's not the British imagination. That's a demonstrable, provable fact. Where does the toppling of Bashar al-Assad at the weekend leave Iran? It's looking much weakened, according to many. The Assad family had been Iran's main regional ally since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, and Syria was Iran's corridor for delivering logistical and armed support to the Lebanese group Hezbollah and to Hamas in Gaza, both of which have been severely damaged by Israel's military action since October the 7th. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei will address the country tomorrow. Will he acknowledge Iran's difficulties in the last couple of weeks? Mohammad Marandi is a professor of English literature at the University of Tehran, and we can speak to him now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
How does the Iranian government, how do the Iranian establishment react to losing Assad as an ally in the way that's happened in the last 2 days or so?
I think the secret lies in an email that was leaked by WikiLeaks. It was an email on February the 12th, 2012, from Jake Sullivan, the current U.S. National Security Advisor to Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State then. And in that email, he said, in Syria, or he said, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. So, does Iran want Al-Qaeda to rule Syria? No. Does the United States want Al-Qaeda to rule over Syria? Well, all you have to do is look at that email and also look at the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012, which said that U.S. allies in the region want to create a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq to isolate Syria. That Salafist entity was ISIS. And later on, General Michael Flynn, whom I'm sure you know, he said in an interview on Al Jazeera, of all places, that Obama took a willful decision to support this policy. So the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda is not something that Tehran wants, but it is something that the West has been pursuing. And one final quote, and that is the U.S. Secretary of State, Kerry, was speaking to the so-called Syrian opposition, and the audio leaked. And in it, he said that we spent billions of dollars alongside others for supporting these terror groups, but he said that we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus to put pressure on the Syrian government. These are the policies that are being pursued in Washington and your capital. I just want to remind you what happened.
I understand the point that you're making, this question of who opposes Assad, but the question I actually asked was about how you react to losing Assad, because Assad was a key figure in the Iranian axis of power. He was a key figure for Iran, and he's gone. He's gone partially because Iran chose or was unable to support him in the final weeks. I'm just interested to know what the Iranian response to that is. Are they sad? Are they ashamed? Are they regretful? What's the reaction to the fact that they couldn't keep Assad in power?
No, I think the only people who should be ashamed are the people who supported Al-Qaeda and continue to support them in your country and in Western intelligence.
So what's the reaction in Iran to Assad going?
I'm getting to that.
Go on then.
And you saw this on 7/7, or in Manchester, the bomb attack which killed lots of young kids. That person was Al-Qaeda affiliate in Libya and what British intelligence was cooperating with these people. So playing with fire is nothing to be proud of. It creates destruction. The Iranians are deeply unhappy that these extremists are taking over. The reason why Iran supported the Syrian government was not because the Syrian government was a wonderful government, but because the alternative was 9/11. The alternative was 7/7.
So why didn't they keep him in power? I guess is the question, because there's a moment where both Russia and Iran could have acted more strongly to support Assad, and they didn't. Is it because ultimately you could see that the people in all its different forms were no longer willing to tolerate his government, and Iran, there was nothing much left to support? What was the reason Iran didn't double down to support him?
Well, if the people of Syria wanted what your government and your governments had to offer, meaning ISIS and Al-Qaeda and their affiliates, they would have fallen in 2011 and 12, 13, 14. But it didn't, despite all the odds. And that was because people in Syria did not want these extremist groups. They preferred Assad, whatever he was, to them. But what the United States and the West did was that they imposed maximum pressure sanctions. They destroyed the Syrian economy. The US illegally occupied the northeast of the country. They stole the oil and the grain. So ordinary Syrians could not have their own oil or their grains, and they were sanctioned, and the Americans were benefiting from it. And in the north, these extremist groups were tolerated, and the Israelis were constantly bombing the country. When this attack began a couple of weeks ago, a Syrian general was earning $40 a month.
So there was no army, you think?
And the Al-Qaeda troops, some of them were earning up to $2,000 a month.
So there was no army to support for Iran to support. I guess the question, though, is that one of the reasons why the Syrian people didn't rise up in 2013, 14, 15, 16 was also the fact that they were under the thumb of a dictator who tortured and disappeared them. I mean, we can't downplay that you say Iran supported Assad not because they thought he was a good person, but for strategic reasons. We must reflect on the reasons why the Syrians weren't able to overthrow him was because he tortured hundreds of thousands of them. He disappeared hundreds of thousands of them, and he actually displaced millions of them.
I think you are distorting reality. I think you're trying to hide the role that your government's played in the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Syrians.
Well, I'm not imagining Sednaya prison. I'm not imagining the woman I spoke to on this program. No, I'm just saying I'm not imagining the fact that people have been disappeared by Assad. That's not my imagination. That's not the British imagination. That's a demonstrable, provable fact.
Look, if you don't want me to talk, just tell me to go, and then you can just have a 10-minute rant afterwards.
It's not a rant. I'm pointing out that Assad has disappeared hundreds of thousands of people. That is a documented, evidential fact. That's not been made up.
Yes, your documented facts come from Western intelligence.
So he hasn't. In your view, he's never done it. Sednaya prison is a figment of our collective imaginations.
If you cannot tolerate a single sentence, it shows your weakness. It shows where you stand. It shows where your company is pushing you. You cannot tolerate a single sentence. You're afraid of the truth.
I've just been listening to you for 7 minutes. I'm pointing out that you can't tolerate the reality of a tyrant who has murdered people. I'm perfectly calm. The point I'm making is you cannot tolerate the existence. We are talking. You cannot tolerate the fact that President Assad murdered hundreds of thousands of his own people. That just seems to me to be notable.
Yes. Okay. Are you going to be quiet now?
Go ahead.
Your government murdered hundreds of thousands of Syrians. Your government started the dirty war. Your government supported ISIS and Al-Qaeda. If there wasn't this dirty war, nothing extraordinary would have happened in Syria. Syria is
Assad was blameless in this.
You don't tolerate anything. Syria was no more despotic.
I tell you what, if I would have a conversation with Iranian media, how much toleration would there be? I don't feel you're in any position. I don't feel you're in any position to tolerate notions of what happens to dissent. This is a ridiculous point to be getting into.
In Iran, there's much more open debate than in your country.
That is a ridiculous thing. I mean, that's such a ridiculous thing to say. I think we may never have a meeting of minds here, Mohammed. We might have to leave it there. Mohammad Marandi there.
Intellectually honest.
I'm being intellectually honest to say that there is considerably more freedom in Britain.
Your intelligence, absolutely. In Iran, there are people, websites that operate in Iran that celebrate Assad's fall. But when I try to speak for 2 minutes to say that the blame of what happened in Syria falls on your government.
You've spoken for 8 minutes, Mohammad Marandi. We'll have to leave it there. We'll have to leave it there. I guarantee we'll have to leave it there. I guarantee you that the amount of time you've had in this area is far greater than we'd have expressing dissent in the country of Iran. You might disagree with that, Mohammed, but I don't think there's much more to be said. That's Mohammad Marandi, Professor of English Literature at the University of Tehran.